How is everybody doing today? This is Pete here at Spawn Fly Fish, and we are going to tie a little caddis pattern I call the mid-stage caddis, and you'll see why as we go along. But in the vise I've got a Firehole 523, and this is the size 12. And then for a bead I've got a 6mm Spawn tungsten football bead, and it's slotted, and of course this color is black. And now to secure the bead and add just a little bit of weight, I'm going to put about 8 or 9 wraps of 0.020 non-lead weighted wire, and cut that like so, and then just round that cut edge over with the inside curved section of your dedicated scissor just for cutting the wire. I know there are some people that just use one scissor for everything, and that's fine if you can get by with it, but you will dull up a good pair of scissors pretty quick cutting wire. All right, enough of the preaching. So on the back side of that bead, there's a big slot, and on the other side, there's a chunk of bead. We want that chunk of bead to stay up so that when this is in the water, that bigger chunk of weight rides this hook point up. So jam that wire into there just a touch, and now we're ready to start. So for thread, just uni, this is 6/0 black. Pretty simple fly we got going today. So the reason I call this the mid-stage caddis, for a long time I was obsessed a bit with getting flies that were, you know, just inside and outside of the normal bugs everybody else was tying as far as stages of hatch. So like, you know, when they're tying a larva or a pupa, I wanted something in between a larva and a pupa. And the same with, you know, subimago or imagos and adults, everything. I always like those in-between type stages. So that's where this fly comes from. All right, so now to get this guy going, we've got some Kiley's Nymph skin, and this is translucent bug gut is the color. This stuff's pretty cool. It's very translucent. I'm gonna tie some in here right behind where the weighted wire ends, and the only reason I like to do everything like that is to keep the underbody as even as possible. And you can see this stuff has a pretty big stretch to it, and it's not going to tear real easily. However, just be mindful that it could tear if you really crank down on it and stretch too much. So the nice thing about the translucent colors is that you can go ahead and put in a flash underneath, and then that flash will show through the skin. And so I'm going to keep this simple, and this is some Saltwater Flashabou in Chartreuse, and again we'll start that right where that weighted wire ends and wrap it back all the way to the nymph skin. All right, now that that's done, that's it for the abdomen or body of this fly. So let's wrap this up, and nothing crazy, because again we're going to be covering this with the nymph skin. So if it's not perfect coverage, nobody's going to know except for you and the fish that eats this bug. And believe me, this will get eaten like crazy. Even on the local rivers this last week or so, I mean, there are a bunch of cased caddis and different things, but the cased caddis are just enormous right now. So I'm excited to see how big the adults are going to be here later in the year. All right, so now we've secured that. One cool trick I do like to do with this stuff, and you know, you can use a different color, do it whatever you want, skip it all together. But you'll notice as we begin to wrap this, there's of course going to be a leading edge and then a trailing edge of this nymph skin. So on what will be the trailing edge, I've got a dark brown marker here, and this is a Copic, and it's actually called Dark Bark. And I'm going to run a very, got a little out of hand there, but I'll be all right. But I want that edge really darkened up there. You can see I got a little overzealous on a couple spots, but guess what? It's going to look great when we wrap this. So now when you wrap this, that tailing or following edge now is going to have a mark or just a little coloration, and adds a little bit of realism, and I really like the effect. So here we go, just wrapping this bad boy up, and just be mindful, like you don't want to bulk too much, and you also don't want to pull too much, so it's just a comfortable amount of tension as you do overlapping wraps here. And you can see we're going to end up with something really buggy at the end of this. Once this is in the water, a little bit of light and glint coming out from that flash underneath, and it's go time. You know, if you're in an area that gets some flooding, that's when, you know, crane fly larvae, all those good little grubby bugs get washed into the water, and fish are very aware of that and love those. So this fly doesn't necessarily have to be fished, only at certain times. You can fish it quite a bit, and the recognition is there, and the fish are happy to eat it. All right, pretty easy thus far. Just a couple more steps and we are done with this thing. And I mean, you can tie up so many of these in an evening, and they just catch so many fish. All right, so here we've got Nature Spirit Fluorescent Chartreuse CDC. If you look closely at the tip of the feather, I trimmed it, but left those little barbules so that they act like teeth to the thread, and gives me something for that thread to grab onto and into. There we go, and now it's not going to slip out. Just trim off the tag end there. We don't need those. There we go. A little bit more cleanup there. Now, for the emulation of a head or body parts or whatever else coming out of this thing, let's call it a thorax for now. Just got some standard peacock off of an eyed stick, and I want some pretty dense coverage here. I'm going to go with 3 Herls off of that stick, and I will tie these in right here behind the bead. I'm not going to really crowd it though, and I'm going to leave myself about 1.5 inches off the tips of those fibers that we're not going to use. So once you have it securely tied in, just trim those tips out of there. And you see these little CDC fibers are doing what I want them to do, but they're jumping the gun. They're trying to wrap around and grab onto everything. And that's what they'll do in the water. All these tiny little microscopic barbules on the CDC holds on to the air inside of a water molecule. And so it looks like little bubbles coming off of this thing. So now you see we've tied that back all the way. Very secure. And now get this tied all the way up behind there. All right, if you've seen this deal with the peacock before, get them all pulled up and gently start to spin. And we're just going to create a little peacock rope here with these 3 Herls. Got enough there, and now start making this thorax here. Doesn't have to be super big, but I do want it to stand out. And peacock is just a fish magnet, so I use it in quite a bit of my flies, especially as a thorax for caddis. Can't beat it. All right, so we got last turn there. I'm going to tie that off, and this is going to be pretty buggy. There we go. So now I'm going to pull all this back and get a couple thread wraps in the front of everything, just so that it's not in my way when I start wrapping that CDC. And also I can go in and very cleanly now remove these peacock Herls. And voila. So now I'm just going to start wrapping that CDC. And this, of course, mimics the color of that larva that's inside of a cased caddis. And again, fish recognize certain keys or triggers, and Chartreuse is definitely on the list. All right, it's got that couple good wraps of CDC on that feather. Now we've got 3 wraps to secure it down. Pull back any of those loose fibers there. There's one that's trying to be difficult. And now just a couple wraps in front of the feather and trim out the butt end. And there we go. Nothing to it. I got 1 stray, maybe 2 there. I'm going to trim those out really quickly. And now we are ready for the whip finish. And let me grab Josh's whip finisher. Give me 1 second. And I'm back. Sorry about that. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the first one. We'll do another one just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Voila, and there you have it. Trim out that thread. Time for a little head cement here. And for the cement, I'm using some Loon hard head clear. And I do want a nice covering of all those thread wraps. This thing's gonna get on the bottom, bounce around. The hook is gonna ride point up. So you don't have to worry about that snagging too much. I'm gonna try to trim out 1 little piece of that CDC there. And there's a pretty good chance wherever you're fishing there are some kind of caddis in the water. Even still water, you know, they do get different hatches of caddis, but again, this is just a buggy deal, and so it gets eaten quite often, and it's definitely worth having in your arsenal. And we are just about finished there. All right, and there you have it, folks. The mid-stage caddis, tied with Kiley's nymph skin for the body, little CDC and Peacock, and of course, spawn football bead in front, just to make sure things get down where they need to be. Thanks everybody for watching. Hope you tie a bunch of these up. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you on the water.